To the jury, "You didn't get it. It's," Simon says. "All right, call your next witness."
Detective Cooley.
"Actually, we've been in session. Even though you haven't been here. We were handling some issues that we had to handle. That's why it was not a formal introduction."
Please raise your right hand. I do. Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Robert Charles Cooley. Last name, Cooley.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You're employed by the Sheriff's Department, correct?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been with the Sheriff's Department?
Be 25 years in July.
And what are your current assignments?
My current assignment is I'm a detective stationed out of the Santa Ynez, Solvang station.
Back on November 18, 2003, were you involved in the execution of a search warrant at the Neverland Valley Ranch?
Yes, I was.
And were you assigned some specific responsibilities in connection with the execution of that search warrant?
Yes, I was.
And what responsibilities, what was your primary responsibility that day?
My primary responsibility was as a scribe at the arcade building on that property.
Would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury just what it means to be a scribe in connection with the execution of a search warrant?
Being a scribe means that you're responsible for taking and seizing all evidence that's located by other searchers, and then packaging and sealing that evidence and documenting that evidence on a report.
All right. Did you do that on that particular day in the arcade?
Yes, I did.
And did you do it in conjunction with some particular officers?
Yes, I did.
And Officer, Detective Con Abel was one of the people you worked with that day?
Yes, he was.
And when you set up business or set up your location in the arcade, particularly where did you set up your position to become a scribe? Where you did your scribing, I guess would be the best way to put it.
There were actually a couple locations. Down where we did the first floor, I just set up on a table down there. And then when we moved up there to a library area in that same building, I was right outside the library door.
And what about when you went in the cellar?
We went in the cellar. That stuff was actually brought back to the table that was on the first floor.
Okay, good. Now, I'm just going to show you a few items here.
Excuse me, can I see them before they're?
I thought you had.
I follow.
581, 582 and 583.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Okay, thank you.
All right, let's talk about the first one. It's an item designated in this case as Exhibit 581. Do you see that?
Yes, sir, I do.
And inside of that are 3 books in a brown paper bag. Do you see that?
Correct.
Do you recognize the brown paper bag?
Yes, I do.
When and where was the first time you saw that brown paper bag?
That would have been when the items were seized from the cellar area, and I placed them in that brown paper bag, and that's my writing on the outside of that brown evidence bag.
So the white piece of paper with the black writing is your handwriting, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And with regard to that particular item, 581, did you put those books into that brown paper bag?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do with the brown paper bag after you put the books inside of it, into 581?
I sealed it, and then initialed and wrote my name on the outside of the evidence tag, seal itself.
And do you see those initials now?
Yes, they're still there.
Okay. Now, why don't you put that item aside? Now, currently, let me just ask you this. Currently that's in a plastic bag, the whole brown paper bag with the 3 books.
That's correct.
Do you have any knowledge about where the plastic bag came from?
Not of this bag, but I know of the nature, why this bag was used.
Why was that?
This is because occasionally if evidence is going to be reviewed, it's opened, that the paper bag starts to get fragile and can't be sealed properly, and then they'll place it back in another larger bag, in this case this plastic bag, and reseal the plastic bag.
And that's a procedure you've used before?
Yes, it is.
Now, let's direct your attention to item 582, which is in evidence here. You've picked up a brown bag, correct?
Correct.
Do you recognize that bag?
Yes, I do.
And when and where was the first time you saw that particular bag?
This bag with this book was found up in the correction. The book was found in the library area in the upper story of the arcade building.
Yes, sir.
And I placed this book inside this paper bag, and this is my handwriting on the white tag on the outside.
And after you put the book into that particular bag, what did you do with it?
Then I sealed the paper bag and wrote my name on the outside of the seal.
And you see the seal and your initials on the bag.
Yes, it's still there.
Okay. Now, let's look at 583 if we can. 583 is a smaller brown paper bag, correct?
Correct.
Alright. And when and where was the first time that you saw that particular bag?
This also was from the library in the upper story of the arcade area.
You're talking about the item that's inside the bag, correct?
Right.
And that was given to you by somebody.
Yes, it was.
And who was that?
At this point I don't recall. It would have been one of the searching detectives that was in the library at the time.
So they gave it to you and you put it in the bag and it has a white piece of paper with writing on the front, correct?
Correct.
And is that your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Now, did you also seal that particular bag?
Yes, I did.
Do you see the place where you sealed it and your initials?
It's still there.
Now, with regard to the items 581, 582 and 583, after you sealed them, you put the items that were given to you by the seizing officer, put them in the bag, you sealed it, and you put the identification information on the front as you've told the jury. What did you do with those three particular items after that?
After they were sealed and we concluded our search, these were turned over to forensics detectives at the search warrant scene, the front of the main house.
Alright, thank you. No further questions.
Questions?
Yes, please, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
You said your function was to be a scribe.
That's correct.
And as a scribe, do you do any search yourself?
Occasionally we will do searching also, depending upon how large the area is.
Did you search anything on that particular day, November 18th?
I believe so, I did, yes.
What did you search?
I assisted in the search of the downstairs arcade building, and actually the whole building, the arcade, the cellar and the upstairs library area.
Now, you indicated that as a scribe, I think you said words to the effect, you were at a location where people would bring items to be seized to you.
Correct.
And where was this location that you were talking about?
In particular, downstairs, the first location was at the front of the arcade on a table there. And then when we moved upstairs to the library area, was right outside the door of the library.
And were you sort of searching and then being a scribe, and then searching and being a scribe, or just being a scribe the whole time?
No, I was doing some searching, and if somebody found an item of evidence that needed to be seized and packaged, then I would do my job as the scribe, seize the item, package and then seal it.
Do you package and seal to prevent contamination?
I package and seal to preserve the evidence that's given to me.
Do you package and seal to prevent contamination?
If I'm following you, too, I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for contamination-wise.
Do you know what contamination of evidence means?
Fingerprints, etc. Is that what you're looking for?
I'm asking if you know what contamination of evidence means.
I guess I'm not following the course. When it's given to me, I package it as it's given to me.
Maybe I'm not being clear. Have you ever heard of the word contamination when it comes to evidence?
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
It depends a lot on the evidence. If it's evidence that we think might need to be fingerprinted, then it's placed in a paper bag and sealed. If it's evidence that we think might need, say, DNA, for instance, it's packaged and sealed accordingly to keep others from touching it.
Were any of the three items in front of you packaged and sealed to prevent contamination?
Well, I was the last one to handle it, so it was packaged in there, and then it wasn't my call whether it needed to be fingerprinted later on. So I just packaged it. I was the last one to handle it, packaged it like I would normally package evidence, and then it was turned over to forensics.
Did you package it to preserve the items so it could be fingerprinted?
I would have to say I did. I was the last one to handle it, and it was sealed and turned over to forensics.
Were the 3 items that you packaged and sealed to preserve the ability to do any DNA testing?
That, again, would not have been my call. I was wearing gloves when I was packaging evidence, so if anything later on needed to be completed, fingerprinting, DNA evidence, it was packaged in paper to preserve that, and then turned over to forensics, and then forensics would have made the call as to how they handled it after that.
So am I correct in assuming that you packaged and sealed those 3 items to preserve the possibility of both fingerprinting and DNA testing on those items?
That's one of the reasons why they're packaged and sealed immediately, yes.
And what are the other reasons why they're packaged and sealed immediately?
To prevent a confusion as to evidence being seized and who seized it.
Now, when you turn them over to forensics, you're saying it's their responsibility to decide whether they're going to test for fingerprints or not.
Not exactly. It would probably be the lead investigator or the investigators on the case that would decide what they were going to have fingerprinted and what they were going to have tested for DNA.
Now, in your function as a scribe, does it ever happen that someone says to you, "See this evidence? We're going to do fingerprinting testing"?
Has it ever happened to me?
Yes.
Yes.
It didn't happen in this case, correct? With respect to these 3 items.
In this particular case, with respect to these 3 items, I was not told specifically that these were to be fingerprinted. I just packaged them like I would normally package them.
And you were not told specifically that anyone wanted to do DNA testing on those 3 items, correct?
That's correct.
And who handed those items to you?
They would have been the searching detectives that were assigned to that building. And I do not recall who specifically handed these items to me.
Don't you normally note that on the item?
Not normally in the course of search warrants that I've conducted. It's my responsibility to take the item and then package it and seal it as the seizing deputy.
In terms of determining what is called chain of custody, meaning who had possession of the item at a particular time, don't you normally note that on the package?
No, because in my particular job, I become the seizing detective. Each of these items was photographed where it was located, and then brought to me, and I packaged it, became the seizing detective, and became responsible for the evidence.
And is any record made, to your knowledge, of, let me rephrase that. Was any record made, to your knowledge, of who in particular gave you either of those 3 items?
Not to my knowledge. I have the detectives listed in my report that was on scene at the time.
If you wanted to determine who gave you one of those 3 items, what would you do?
Probably have to go back to the detectives that were on scene and ask them if they remembered actually locating that item.
You would have to rely on their memory.
Correct.
To your knowledge, no written record is made when someone hands you an item of evidence that may later be used in a case.
It wasn't done in this case, no.
It wasn't done in this case.
No.
Well, you're aware that approximately 69 people related to the sheriff's department descended on Neverland on that particular day, right?
Correct.
And do you know how many of those 69 people or approximately 69 people were involved in the search?
Of the arcade building.
Of any part of Neverland?
Not exactly, no.
You had a meeting of those who were going to be involved in the search before you arrived, correct?
Correct.
And guidelines were given to everyone before you entered Mr. Jackson's premises, right?
Assignments were made, yes.
And are you telling the jury that there was no procedure to ensure if someone took a piece of evidence or whatever they wanted to use it for and handed it to another officer, there was no procedure to identify who did that?
Not that I recall that was brought up at the briefing.
What was brought up at the briefing, now?
Again, assignments, as to who was going to be searching what part of the ranch.
But what I'm saying is this. Aren't reports typically made, if someone decides, for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifferent, to focus on a particular item, pick up that item, take it to a scribe, like yourself? Are you saying there is no record made of who actually initially retrieved the item and for what reason?
I did not make a record of that, no. I became the seizing detective.
Okay, so in other words, what you're saying is, the, quote, seizing detective is responsible for packaging items, but not responsible for determining how those items even got to he or her, correct?
I can tell you which part of the arcade building these items came from.
But you can't tell me who handled them before you did, right?
No.
And you can't tell me where they were found before you got them, right?
Only if I go back and look at the photographs prior to them being brought to me.
And were they photographed before you got them?
Yes.
Okay. Would the photographs identify who did the photographing?
The photographs would have on them who actually took the photo.
Would the photographs identify who actually retrieved the item initially?
That I don't know. I would have to look at the photograph to see if the detective who actually located the item is in the photo.
Well, you're aware in this case, I think, and tell me if you're not. But I think you're aware that there have been photographs taken of magazines, for example, that were allegedly in particular locations at Neverland, right?
I was not aware of items seized or photographs taken in other portions of the ranch except for the arcade building.
Well, if it became an issue in a case like this, how a particular magazine was in a particular location, or how a book or a magazine got out of a box, for example, that it initially was in, are you saying no record is made of who would have put their hands in the box and picked the book or magazine out?
In my case, with these 3 items, that was not done.
Do you know why that wasn't done?
Actually, no, I don't.
But wouldn't you agree that in many other situations you've been in, it has been done?
I have never done it acting as a scribe. I've always just seized the item, made sure it was photographed prior to it being moved and brought to me, or if I actually went and retrieved the item, I made sure it was photographed before I moved it and seized it.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
That's okay.
Did you finish?
Yes, I had.
Let me ask you this. Let's take one of those books, okay? Doesn't matter which one. Let's assume the book is found in a bookcase, all right?
Okay.
Now, you know there were lots of bookshelves in the library area, correct?
Correct.
There were lots and lots of books all over the library, right?
Correct.
And you probably didn't count them, but you certainly saw shelf after shelf after shelf, right?
Yes.
And along with the shelves, you saw boxes everywhere, right?
Right.
And there were books found in those boxes, right?
Correct.
Now, if someone opens a box, takes a book out, places it on the ground, looks at other books, takes them out, puts them on the ground, and somewhere in that search finds something they want to give to you, there's really no record of knowing where that particular item was when it was first seen, correct?
Correct.
In other words, if someone took a bunch of books out of a box, laid them around, and decided to focus on one of them, there would be no way of knowing if that person even placed that book in a particular location when it was photographed, right?
Correct.
The only real record would be that that particular book was given to you, and as the scribe, you're responsible for saying, we found this in this area, right?
Correct.
And you're aware that sometimes it becomes an issue in an investigation as to where something actually was located initially, right?
Correct.
In other words, if something's in a box, it might suggest something different than if something is up on a shelf in plain view, right?
Correct.
You're saying that in this particular investigation at Neverland, with approximately 69 sheriffs searching, no provision was made to identify exactly who found an item first and where they found it, right?
I'm going to object as beyond the scope. I'm going to object lack of foundation as to other officers. He can only speak for himself.
All right, you're sustained.
Okay. Was the intention, as far as you're concerned, I'm only talking about your work as a scribe, was the intention to make sure you were the only person that could identify something that was found in the area where you were searching? In other words, was the intention the following: if an item is used in the courtroom, the records will indicate that I'm the only one responsible for identifying where that item was found?
I think the intent was just to try to minimize the number of people that may have to step up and say, yes, this item was seized and it was seized from the arcade building during the course of this search.
Aha. Now, the word scribe suggests someone who writes something, obviously, but you were doing more than that, right?
Correct.
And if someone made the decision that a particular item found was going to possibly be used in the case, did you then stop your searching and go down and do the sort of scribe type function?
Yes.
And how much time did you spend in the library that day, if you remember?
I don't recall.
And was it a lot of time?
We were there for all day. And I don't recall exactly how much time we spent in the library, no.
Were you looking at books in the library yourself?
Yes, I was looking.
Were you going through the shelves to see what books were on the shelves?
I don't recall exactly what part of the library I searched, but I'm sure I looked at some of the books on the shelves.
Well, was your desire to sort of go book by book and see sort of what each book was?
I don't recall if I actually pulled every book out. I think I was just more looking to see what was in the general area. The library was quite crowded, so I mainly stayed back at the door to do the seizing.
And to your knowledge, was any effort made to forensically determine who had been in the library and looking at those books?
Forensically?
Yes.
Like fingerprints afterwards, or?
Sure.
To the best of my knowledge, that I recall, everybody was wearing gloves when they were doing their searching, so if I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, here again.
Well, everybody was told. Excuse me, that's not the right word. People were directed into the library, walked wherever they wanted to walk, right? Looked around as they chose. And if they saw a book somewhere that interested them, bring it to you, right?
That's correct. We have a list of people that were in the library.
And 3 books were brought to you.
These 3 items here.
Yes. Those 3 items that were brought to you.
Okay.
After those 3 items were brought to you, did you continue looking at books?
I think, if I recall correctly at this point, there was evidence coming out of the library, and I mainly stayed at the door and did the seizing and the scribing.
Okay. No further questions.
Redirect.
One question, Your Honor. I think you told the jury before that one of the ways that you ensure the integrity of where the evidence came from is that you photograph in place before it's picked up and taken.
That's correct.
Is that a procedure that you use?
Yes, it is.
To your knowledge, is that a procedure that was used this day?
Yes, it is.
No further questions.
Very briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Sneddon used the word, in place. Please tell the jury what the word, in place, means, to you.
To me, in place, means that the item was photographed where the searching detective located that item.
Now, if an item is found at the bottom of a box, pulled out of the bottom of the box and then photographed, there is no guarantee it's going to be photographed at the bottom of the box where it was found, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as assumes facts not in evidence, that it wasn't photographed in place.
The objection is sustained, but I've warned you not to use speaking objections.
All right.
Objection sustained.
Lack of foundation.
No further questions, Your Honor.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. You may step down.
Deputy Padilla.
Come to the front of the courtroom, please. When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Yes, I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Freddy Padilla. Freddy. Padilla. Padilla.
Thank you.
Why don't you hand me these bags? Thank you. All right. Detective Padilla. How long have you been? You're with the Sheriff's Department, correct?
Yes, sir.
How long have you been with the Sheriff's Department?
11 years.
And with regard to your current duty assignment, what is that?
I'm a detective with the Sheriff's Office.
And in what capacity are you a detective?
I work personless crimes.
On November 18, 2003, did you participate in the execution of a search warrant at Neverland Valley Ranch?
Yes, sir.
What were your particular duty responsibilities that day?
I was assigned to package the items of evidence seized by the investigators and deputies at the Neverland Ranch.
Was there a particular location that you were assigned to?
Yes, sir.
Would you tell the jury where you were assigned to?
The main house of the residence.
And was there a certain location within the main house?
Yes, sir.
Where was that?
It was in Mr. Jackson's bedroom.
And in connection with the execution of your responsibilities, maybe I didn't ask you this. What was your responsibility?
The investigators would locate items of evidence, seize them, and deliver them to me, and I would package them and seal them, and according to what they described, I would write on our Shish 451, our sheriff's property form.
Did you have a computer there handy where you did this work on?
Yes, sir.
As it was given to you?
Yes, sir.
And on that particular day, you were given a number of items, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And? Your Honor, I'm going to need a second to retrieve a number of bags from over here.
All right.
I'm going to hand you an exhibit marked as 580, clear plastic bag, binder inside of it, in a brown bag, and ask you if you recognize the exhibit 580.
I don't recognize the item, but I recognize the packaging and my writing.
All right. And you said, by packaging. What do you mean by packaging?
The brown paper bag. These are the bags that I used at the Neverland Ranch, and I wrote down the case number and the specifics about the case.
And did you write down the officer who gave you that item or gave you an item?
Yes, sir, I did.
Who was that?
This is Detective Shepard.
What was it that you were given that went into that original brown bag?
On the property form, I would write down a description according to the investigator, what they seized, but here I wrote down magazines on the package.
Okay. Now, after you were given the magazine by Detective Shepard, you placed it in that brown bag that's inside of the exhibit 580.
Yes, sir.
And did you seal it in some fashion?
Yes.
Would you describe how you sealed it?
It's the department-issued evidence tape and I would staple it, seal it with the tape, and put my initials and the date on it.
And after you did that, what did you do with the item?
At the house, I stored it, and I attempted to keep them in numerical order, given my view.
With regard to the brown bag inside the item marked as 580, is that what you did in this particular case?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Now I've handed you an item that's marked, I believe, as 576, is that correct? Should be like a tag down there.
The item is 303.
And that's your item. This is the exhibit item 576.
Oh, yes, sir.
Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And with regard to the particular bag that's been marked as exhibit item 576, do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that?
By my writing on the front of the package.
And when did you place something inside that package?
Yes, sir.
When and what did you place in there?
I don't know specifically. I'd have to look on the Shish 451.
You don't recall, but you placed something there.
Yes, sir.
Does it indicate what officer it was that gave you the items you placed in the bag, 576?
Not on this package. I'd have to look on the Shish 451.
Do you have your Shish 451 there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Why don't you do that? And this is a document that was prepared at or about the time that these entries were made, is that correct?
That's correct. It says by Detective Shepard.
All right. And that's item 576, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you seal that item in much the same fashion you described to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury on the other one?
Yes, sir.
All right. You have an item in front of you marked as, whichever one that you have that's closest. It doesn't make any difference.
Exhibit 575.
575, all right. Do you recognize 575?
Yes, sir.
And when and where was the item 575 the first time you saw it?
It was in the master bedroom of Mr. Jackson.
Did somebody bring you that?
Yes, sir.
Bring something to you in that bag?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
It was Detective Shepard.
And when Detective Shepard gave you the item, did you prepare the bag that's marked as Exhibit 575?
That is correct.
Did you put the item in it and seal it?
Yes, sir.
In much the same fashion that you've described?
Correct.
All right. Let's turn our attention now to 569, if we could. That's in evidence. With regard to 569, do you recognize that item?
Yes, sir.
And how do you recognize it?
The packaging.
And do you recognize the handwriting?
Correct.
Who's that? Whose handwriting is it?
It's mine.
And with regard to that particular package, you place some items inside that package.
Correct.
And from whom did you get the items that you placed inside that package? 569.
Detective Shepard.
And when you did that, did you seal it in much the same fashion that you described to the jury?
Correct.
And with regard to after you have sealed the item 569, 575 and 576, what did you do with those items?
I stored them in my view at the master bedroom area.
Alright. With regard to the last item I've just given you, which is marked as 633 in evidence, do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And how do you recognize that?
By the packaging.
And whose handwriting is on that packaging?
That's my writing.
When and where was the first time you saw that bag?
When it was given to me by the investigator in the master bedroom area.
The bag itself, where was the first time that you saw that bag? Not the item that's in it, the bag.
The bag itself.
Yes.
Empty.
Before you put the writing on it, yes.
You're asking where?
I'm asking you a bad question. Let me try and see if I can do it. After the officer gave you an item.
Yes, sir.
What did you do with it?
I put it in this bag and sealed it.
Okay, thanks. That was a lot better.
Sorry.
And does it indicate what officer gave you the item?
Yes, it does.
And who was that?
Detective Shepard.
Okay. And was it sealed and your initials placed on it in much the same fashion as the others I talked to you about?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me hand you these items that are in evidence as 588, 589. Alright. With regard to the exhibit 588, do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to that particular exhibit, when and where was the first time you saw it?
When it was brought to me by the investigator in the master bedroom area.
Does that indicate to you who the officer was who brought it to you?
Yes, sir.
Who was that?
Detective O'Grady.
And did you fill out the bag and the information on the bag?
Yes, sir.
And did you seal it?
Yes, I did.
And place your initials on it?
Yes, sir.
Now, excuse me. Did you notice, with regard to your shish 451, whether there's a difference between the name on the bag and the name placed on your shish 451 form?
Yes, I did.
What's the difference?
On the package it says Detective O'Grady, and on my shish 451, it has the name of another investigator on it.
And what, to your knowledge, is the correct one?
It's Detective O'Grady.
You placed that on there when he gave you the item.
That's correct.
Alright. You have now 589 in front of you.
Yes, sir.
And with regard to the exhibit 589, who gave you that item?
DA Investigator Ellis.
And did you place the information on that particular exhibit?
Yes, sir.
Did you place inside of that exhibit the item that was given to you by Detective Ellis?
Correct.
Or Investigator Ellis?
Correct.
And did you then seal it? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And made the notations on the bag?
Yes, sir.
Alright, let me grab those. Okay. The top item there, I believe, is item 710, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
712.
What is it?
This one's 712.
712, alright. 712. I guess I was mistaken. With regard to that particular item, were you given something to put inside that bag?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize the bag?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize it?
By the bag itself, my writing, and my signature on the bag.
And in that particular item, does it indicate to you who the officer was that gave you the item?
Yes, it does.
Who is that?
Detective Wolf.
And did you prepare the information, seal the particular exhibit and put your initials on it like you described in the other ones?
Correct.
Alright, would you put that aside for just a moment? Sir, do you have an exhibit up there? Let's take the top one, and you just told me what it is and…
Exhibit 562.
Alright, 562. Do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to the particular exhibit, it's a brown paper bag. Did you put the notations on that bag?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did an officer give you something to place in that bag?
That is correct.
What officer was that?
Detective Alvarez.
And did you do that? Did you place the item in the bag?
Correct.
And fill out the information?
Yes, sir.
And did you then seal it and package it?
Correct.
All right. The next one is that 288?
Correct.
And with regard to 288, do you recognize that?
I recognize the writing on the bag. Yes, sir.
Is that yours?
Yes.
All right. And were you given something to put into that particular bag?
Correct.
It's a large bag, right?
Yes, sir.
And who's the officer that gave you the item to put in there?
Detective Alvarez.
And did you also place the item in that bag, seal it, and put your initials on the bag?
Yes, sir.
And at that point, it was placed down with the other items that were later given to somebody else, correct?
Correct.
You should have one other bag up there. Perhaps it's underneath. Number 565.
I only see 3.
Okay. We'll have to search around for that.
Tom.
Oh, never mind. I found it. Off the record discussion held at council table. All right. 470, the briefcase. Thanks, Lorna. I've handed you a briefcase that bears the initials, or the numbers 470, on it.
Yes, sir.
It's in evidence in this particular case. Do you recognize that briefcase?
I don't recognize the briefcase, no, sir. I don't remember it.
He has to speak up.
I can't hear you.
I don't remember the briefcase.
With regard to, would you check your shish 451, please?
Yes, sir.
And look under item 317.
Briefcase.
Was that given to you?
Yes, sir.
Do you see some? Open the bag if you have to, detective.
Open the plastic.
Yeah, if you have to, sure. It's a plastic bag. You're opening it. And the briefcase itself that's marked as 470 has some evidence seals on it, correct?
Correct.
Do you recognize any of those seals?
I recognize the seals, but not the writing on them.
Okay. Do you know what you did with the item that's 470 when it was given to you that day?
470. May I explain one?
Sure. That's why you're up there.
While I was seizing, there was times when there was some investigators waiting in line, and in my presence, under my supervision, the investigators would help me seize it, and then I would take it from them and place it on the line of where the items were.
All right. And is this one of those items that you followed that procedure on?
It looks like this isn't my writing.
And does that indicate what officer? Does your shish 451 indicate what officer brought you that?
I can't read the initials.
On your shish 451.
Sorry. Detective Zealous.
At the time that you were involved in the process with regard to 470, did you look inside the item at all?
No, sir.
Okay. If we give you any more, we're going to cover you up. All right. I've just given you the item that's been marked as 561, is that correct?
Correct.
Do you recognize the brown bag?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
By the writing and my initials on the seal.
All right. Who is the officer who gave you the items? Who gave you the items to put inside that bag?
Detective Zealous.
Did you note that on the bag?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you place the item inside the bag?
Yes, sir.
And seal it and initial it?
Yes, sir.
And set it aside for later providing to somebody else to take in book, correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, I have here an item that I'd like marked as 552 for identification purposes. I'll show it to counsel. I'll show you 552. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Where was that the first time you saw it?
It was in the master bedroom area.
And were you given some items to place in that particular bag?
Yes, I was.
By who?
Detective Sergeant Roble.
And now with regard to the time that the items were placed in that bag, do you recall how many items were placed in there and what they were?
I don't recall what specific items were placed inside.
Would you check your SHISH 451 form, please, and see if it refreshes your recollection?
Magazines.
And were there multiple magazines placed in there? I mean, do you have an S by it or did you have a magazine?
I had, on the SHISH 451, I have an S by it.
You didn't put the number.
No, sir.
Okay. Alright. When you took the items that you were given by Sergeant Roble, you placed them into that particular bag. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then did you then put the notations on it, seal it, and put your initials on it?
Correct.
Alright. Now, that bag, at this particular point in time, only contains one item in it, correct? Open the bag and look.
Yes, sir.
And that's a book.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Alright. Detective Padilla, were you given item marked as 3, that you marked as 364 by Detective Roble?
May I look on the
Yes, please.
364.
If you have no present recollection, you need to refresh your recollection. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
And with regard to that particular item, did you prepare a brown bag, with the notations on it that you've described to the jury as to the other items, in the same manner?
Yes, sir.
And did you seal it and put your initials on it?
I need to see the bag itself.
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I needed a recess to do these things. I'm just jumping all over. Madam Clerk, I believe it's 553.
I don't have that.
You don't have that?
No.
All right, Judge. At this time I'll recall this officer when I get a chance to go through all of this stuff so we're not wasting a lot of time in front of the jury.
All right, thank you. Cross-examine.
Yes, please, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
You were designated the scribe in the main house, right?
Yes, sir.
And the main house is the house where you have Mr. Jackson's bedroom, right?
Correct.
And Mr. Jackson's bedroom, as you recall, is 2 levels, right?
I recall, yes.
You got a downstairs, and you got a stairway that goes to an upstairs, right?
Yes, sir.
And did you perform your activities as a scribe in Mr. Jackson's room?
It was downstairs, and it looked like a lobby. There was a large TV in there and some chairs. There was not a bed in the room where I set up.
But in the room where you say you set up, was that part of Mr. Jackson's 2-level bedroom?
Yes, sir.
Was it downstairs?
Correct.
And when you say you set up, what did you do?
I set up a table where I processed all the items seized at the house.
Did you bring the table with you?
Yes, sir.
Was it something you actually brought to Neverland as part of the search?
It was provided to me by personnel at the ranch.
Okay. When you say personnel, do you mean Mr. Jackson's personnel?
No, sir. No, sir. Sheriff's staff.
Was the table you used something sheriffs brought with them?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you brought a table into Mr. Jackson's lower part of his bedroom, and that's where you set up, right?
Yes, sir.
And did you have a chair there, too?
I had a chair.
And did you sort of sit there and wait for people to bring items to you to log in?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you participate in any search activities yourself?
No, I did not.
Were you a scribe the whole day?
Yes, sir.
All right. Was it all of the main house?
At the main house.
Okay. Now, you signed in and out at various times that day, correct?
I was relieved by Lieutenant Klapakis.
Okay. So Lieutenant Klapakis became the scribe at times you were not there.
He didn't seize any of the items. I just broke for a lunch break, or left out there, or for a restroom break.
I'm not going to belabor it, but there is a sign in and out sheet that you signed in and out on, right?
I don't recall one.
Okay. Somebody typed up a sheet with various in and out times attributed to various people that were there that day, right?
I don't recall.
Have you seen that sheet?
No, sir, I haven't.
If I show it to you, would it refresh your recollection about signing in and out?
It may.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I don't recall ever seeing that.
How about the following?
I don't recall. I don't remember.
Indicating.
I don't recall ever seeing that.
Okay. I showed you what appear to be logs of people on the search team entering in and out, and you say you've never seen those sheets before.
I don't recall ever seeing them.
Do you recall signing in and out?
That was in 2000. I don't recall. I don't recall.
Do you recall if anyone else replaced you as a scribe in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
No one replaced me. I don't recall that.
So you were the scribe that day, right?
For the main house area, yes, sir.
Okay. How many people did you see searching in Mr. Jackson's bedroom while you were a scribe?
I couldn't physically see the investigators up in the bedroom, since it was upstairs and I was downstairs, so I couldn't answer that question.
You couldn't physically see any of them?
No, sir. I was downstairs and they were upstairs. The bedroom, are you just meaning specifically as to where his bed was?
Maybe I'm not being clear. His bedroom is 2 levels, right?
Yes, sir.
You walk into a door. You enter into the lower level, right?
Correct.
And you set up a table in the lower level, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you must have seen people entering or leaving the bedroom, because you were on that lower level where the entranceway is, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Did you see activity in and out that day?
Yes, sir.
Did you see activity in and out the whole day that you were there?
Yes, sir.
And approximately how many people did you see enter or leave that day?
I would guess maybe 15 to 20.
So 15 or 20 people were searching through Mr. Jackson's bedroom area.
Yes, sir.
As far as you know.
As far as I know, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, would it be correct to say that 16 detectives, 3 sergeants and 5 DA investigators entered into Mr. Jackson's main house that day?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. A total of 24 people were searching through Mr. Jackson's home that day, right?
I don't know about 24.
Would it refresh your recollection if I just show you a police report which identifies who entered the main house that day?
Yes, sir.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Yes, sir. I hadn't counted them, but that's the list I prepared.
Okay. Would you like to count them?
If you'd like me to.
Okay, please. Have you had a chance to look at that document?
Yes, sir.
And have you had a chance to count who was in the main house that day?
Yes, sir.
And would it be accurate to say about 16 detectives, 3 sergeants and 5 DA investigators?
Assigned to the main house, yes, sir.
Okay. And do you think about 20 went into his bedroom?
I don't know what specific jobs each one of them did. That's what I was. Do you want me to continue or?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know which specific officers. I thought you asked how many were assigned in the main house area.
How many did you see go in and out of his bedroom?
Oh, I don't know. I know they were really strict on how many people were assigned to that specific area of the bedroom.
Well, just as far as you remember, how many walked in and out? Because you're the scribe. You're sitting at a table, the lower level, which is where you enter, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's also where you leave, right?
Yes, sir.
So how many people did you see trafficking in and out?
To be honest with you, sir, I don't remember counting, even. I was told what to do, and I don't recall the specific.
Could it have been more than 10?
I don't recall.
No number at all.
I didn't pay attention. No, sir.
You just identified various items of evidence that the prosecutor showed you, correct?
Yes, sir.
And of those items, who did you get them from? You mentioned Shepard, right?
Yes.
Did you mention Zealous?
Yes.
Did you mention anybody else?
Yes, I did.
Who else?
DA Investigator Ellis.
Okay.
And Detective Sergeant Roble.
Okay.
And I don't believe I mentioned any other investigators.
Were you sitting at the table when the search went on?
Yes, sir.
And your job the whole day was to have people bring items to you, and you would package them, right?
Yes, sir.
And you would put them first in a paper envelope, right?
In the appropriate package, depending on the size of the item.
Do you recall someone named Wolf?
Oh, yes, sir. I do.
Was a Detective Wolf involved?
Yes.
You saw Detective Wolf in that bedroom area.
I don't recall seeing that, but I recall the item.
Now, was it your understanding as a scribe that you were supposed to package items to protect them from contamination?
I was assigned to package them, yes, sir.
Were you assigned to package them to protect them from contamination?
Yes, sir.
And what contamination were you trying to protect them from?
Any non-authorized personnel.
Did you have any role in deciding whether or not anything would be fingerprinted?
No, I wasn't, specifically. It was just common sense. If an item appeared and if they told me, hold for prints, I would be sure to use care in what packaging to use.
And typically who would tell you to hold for prints?
The investigator.
Do you recall being told to hold anything for prints?
Yes, I recall some of the investigators were real specific the way they held it and when they delivered it to me.
And how many items do you think you were told to hold for prints?
I remember several of the items we tried not to touch as much as possible, but I don't recall how many or approximately how many specifically were to be held for prints.
Now, the items the prosecutor just showed you, were any of them asked to be held for prints? Do you know?
I don't recall specifically. I don't recall.
Would it refresh your recollection just to take a look?
No, sir.
Why not?
Because I didn't note it on there. Just every item that I packaged, I tried to use the least amount of handling of the package.
Okay, let me go back a bit. I think you just said at times you were told to hold certain specific items for prints, true?
Yes, sir.
And other times you were not told to hold specific items for prints, right?
Yes, sir.
If you were asked to hold something for prints by an investigator, what did you do?
I would use the least amount of. I would not touch it as much as possible.
Would you note anywhere on the packaging, hold for prints?
No, sir.
So, hold for prints, meant, to you, don't touch it as much as you might touch it otherwise.
When they would tell me, yes, sir.
If they didn't tell you, hold for prints, what would you do with it?
Personally, I would not touch it as much as possible.
If they did tell you, hold for prints, what would you do differently?
Extra care.
What does extra care mean?
The least amount possible, without dropping it or contaminating it.
But no records ever made of hold for prints.
No, sir.
Hold for prints is just a verbal suggestion that you touch it as little as possible, correct?
Yes, sir, yes.
And if they don't tell it to you, you can still touch it a little more. Is that what you're saying?
Personally, yes.
Okay, and how would you touch it?
With rubber gloves, and package it in the appropriate bag.
If you're holding for prints, do you put it in a paper bag?
Depends on the item.
And what do you mean?
There's plastic packaging, and there's paper.
But if you look at what you wrote on any of the items you just identified, you won't know whether or not they were held for prints, true?
No, sir.
To your knowledge, as a scribe, are you ever obligated to make a notation anywhere that something is to be held for fingerprinting?
Personally, I would, but I was never told to.
You were never told to?
No, sir.
Do you recall ever doing that as a scribe in any other case?
Of caring for items and try to not touch them as much as possible.
No. As a scribe in any other case, do you recall actually noting on a document, hold for prints?
Yes, sir, on my cases.
But you didn't do it in this case, right?
No, sir.
During the time you were in Mr. Jackson's bedroom working as a scribe, how many times do you think anyone asked you to hold an item for prints?
I recall maybe a few times.
And you don't know what those items were, right, as you sit here today?
No, not specifically, no, sir.
If you held something for prints, was it put in a separate location?
No, sir.
Was it given to anyone special?
No, sir.
So items that were held for prints and items that were not held for prints were given to the same person after you were through with them, right?
Yes, sir.
And who was that person?
It was Sergeant Cintron who was in charge of the property room.
When he got the items, you never saw them again.
No, sir.
And you filled out no report or document of any kind that said hold an item for prints, right?
Right.
And what about the possibility of DNA testing on any of these items? Did you have any procedure that you used if something was to be tested for DNA?
I was not specifically instructed on labeling any of the items for DNA evidence.
Were you ever verbally instructed to give any special treatment for anything that might be used for DNA testing?
No, sir. I don't recall specifically for DNA.
Do you recall being given any instructions of any kind for handling any item that was going to be forensically testing in any particular way?
Just some of the items when they brought them. Try not to touch it as much as possible. Just those items, if you're referring to that.
Okay, but there's no record of what they are, right?
No, sir.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Anything further?
No. No questions.
All right. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Detective Bonner.
Remain standing. Face the clerk. Raise your right hand, please.
Yes.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Craig Bonner, Bonner.
Thank you.
Morning, Detective.
Good morning.
You're employed by the Sheriff's Department.
Yes, I am.
And how long have you been employed by the Sheriff's Department?
Over 11 years.
And you're currently assigned to the Detective Bureau, correct?
That is correct.
And how long have you been a detective?
5 years.
And you were assigned to work on the investigation concerning the child molest allegations against the defendant, Michael Jackson, correct?
That is correct.
And you've been part of that investigative team, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to that particular investigation, you participated in the execution of the search warrant on November 18, 2003, correct?
I did.
And in your capacity, you actually did some searching, correct?
Yes, I did.
Now, after the warrant was executed and the evidence was brought back to the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, were you assigned some responsibilities in connection with the further processing of items that were seized from the Neverland Valley Ranch on November 18, 2003?
Yes, I was.
And could you tell the jury what your responsibilities were?
Basically, my responsibility was to go back, open up the items that were seized, and document the contents and determine if those contents were of specific evidentiary value in our investigation.
Now, specifically I want to direct your attention to an item that's been referred to as item 321 in your reports. Do you recall what 321 was?
Yes, I do.
And what was that?
Some magazines of adult material.
And were these items that you opened, the bag, were these items that were taken from Neverland Valley Ranch and you opened the bag and looked at?
That is correct.
Do you recall when it was you looked at the item 321, your item 321? And you're referring to a piece of paper.
I am. I'm going back to my reports and a chart that I had prepared to assist in that.
All right. Why don't you let me see that so I can show it to counsel? Off-the-record discussion held at counsel table.
Thank you.
All right. Let's talk about item 321. Okay. And when was it that you actually opened the bag and the items contained in 321?
That was on 11/26, 2003.
Where did you do that?
At the Santa Barbara Sheriff's main station in Goleta.
And when you did that, what did you do with regard to those items?
I opened it, photo-documented the contents, and then wrote a report which documented what I found the contents to be.
When you say you photo-documented the contents, would you tell the jury what that means?
Basically what I did is, I took the items out of the bag that they were sealed in, and I spread them out, and took photographs of those items so that I could go back and later ascertain, if something was lost, what it actually came from.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
And after you completed that process, did you put those items back in the bag?
I did.
And did you seal it?
I did.
And did you initial it?
I initialed the bag, yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you some items. Excuse me. Mr. Mesereau. Off-the-record discussion held at council table. Alright. Detective Bonner, in order to try to expedite this, I've asked you to look at the exhibits in that box that have been marked as 554 up to 560 for identification purposes prior to bringing them to court, correct?
That is correct.
And would you, just quickly, just make sure that those are the numbers in that box with those particular binders? That it's 554 through 560.
These are the items that I reviewed.
And, Your Honor, for the record, they have been marked with the official seal of 554 through 560 for identification purposes.
Thank you. All show that they've been identified.
Alright. Now, I also, by the way, do you recognize the magazines that are? Did you? When I asked you to look at them in detail, recognize the magazines inside of the binders that are marked as 554 through 560?
I did.
And where were those items the first time you saw them?
They were contained within the packaging for item 321.
And on the occasion in which you previously identified to the jury on
11 to 26.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I've handed you a series of photographs which are also marked, Your Honor, with the evidence tags for identification purposes of 682 through 688, and I've shown them to counsel. Do you recognize those photographs? Would you take a look at them real quickly? Or take as long as you need, I guess.
I recognize these items as being pictures of the cover sheets of these magazines that are in this box.
554 through 560.
Correct.
Did I ask you to compare the photographs, 682 through 688, with the front covers of each of those items, 564 through 560?
Yes, you did.
And did you do it?
Yes.
And are those photographs accurate depictions of what they purport to represent, which is the front covers of those magazines?
They are.
Your Honor, I'd move that the photos be admitted into evidence at this time.
No objection.
That being.
That would be 682 through 688, Your Honor.
Admitted.
Your Honor, may we have the Elmo, please?
Input 4.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to put the exhibit 682, which is in evidence, up on the board for a second. You can do that now. Now, with regard to the binders that are in front of you that we have previously had marked, for identification purposes, 554 through 560, can you mate up the exhibit 682 to which exhibit that would be?
Can you raise the exhibit slightly?
I think the number's over in the far.
That corresponds with the magazine 321A.
Alright. Now, if we could have the next one placed up there. And with regard to the exhibit 683, which is in evidence, which binder does that correspond to, exhibit number?
That is 321B.
Okay. There's an exhibit number on the back of it. Just turn it over, if you would.
Exhibit number 555.
Okay. Thank you. With regard to the next photograph, please, that's in evidence, and that is 684, and what binder would that, what exhibit number?
That corresponds with evidence item number 321C, and exhibit number 556.
That's 556 for identification. Alright. And with regard to the next photograph. And that is exhibit number 685 that's in evidence. Do you recognize that, and would you marry that up with the particular exhibit number?
Corresponds to exhibit number 557.
Alright. The next one, please. That is number 686.
That corresponds to item, or exhibit number 558.
558. Alright. And that is number 687.
That corresponds to exhibit number 559.
Alright. And then there should be one more, which is photograph number 688 in evidence.
Corresponds to exhibit number 560.
Alright. Thank you, officer. Now, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about an exhibit that is in your department's item number 309. Okay.
Okay.
Now, were you involved in looking into the item 309?
I was.
And do you recall when it was that you looked into those items?
On December 2, 2003.
And what did you do with regard to the item 309?
At the time I opened it up, I inventoried the contents, and I believe I removed the pornographic videos out and gave those a sub-item.
The adult materials.
Objection.
I'm sorry.
He corrected it. Go ahead.
The adult materials.
The adult materials.
Okay. And do you recall what it was that you removed out of the Exhibit 309 when you saw it?
There were 2, barely legal, DVDs.
And did you repackage those?
I did.
And do you recall if you gave them a number when you repackaged them?
I did.
What number did you give them?
I believe I gave it 309A.
Now, at a subsequent time, did you also go back into the Exhibit 309 and repackage any other items there?
I don't know that I did. However, I am aware that that happened.
Okay. So you don't think you were involved in that process?
I don't recall.
Okay. Now, you have an item that is called 363 for your nomenclature.
Correct.
And were you involved in reviewing that particular item?
Yes, I was.
And at the time that you reviewed it, do you recall what was in there?
Yes.
What was in there?
There were magazines of adult nature.
And do you recall what day it was that you looked at the item, your item 363?
That was also done on 11/26, 2003.
And you've described to the jury what you did as to item 321 that you photo-documented. Did you follow that same process with regard to your item 363?
The same procedure, yes.
Okay. And then after you were completed, what did you do with the items that were inside your package 363?
Put them back into the package, sealed the package, signed it, and returned it to evidence.
Tom, do you want to take a look? Your Honor, I see we're a couple minutes from a break. We might save some time if we do this during the break. It's up to you. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. Your Honor, I'd indicate for the record that the items Mr. Mesereau's now looking at are pre-marked as items 530 through 551 for identification purposes. Off-the-record discussion held at council table.
All right, we'll take our morning break.